Hello everyone, welcome to our third web scraping tutorial where we'll keep practicing some of the things that we've learned and also see how they work in the wild, where anything can happen on the internet. So the site I've chosen to look at today is the Michelin Guide, and it's an organization that gives out awards to restaurants, but just from a website level, it has a couple interesting things that I think help show and explain why sometimes data miner isn't getting your data, which can be super frustrating. And the advice there is that when data miner just doesn't grab something, is the first thing is to open up the developer tools and look at the code and try to figure out where in the code what you want is and what it looks like. Is it text or is it an attribute or something else, a link maybe? And we'll see some examples of that here with the Michelin Guide. So if we look at the website, it doesn't really have a list, right? It has hotels, it has magazines, it doesn't really have a list of things that we would want to collect. In our case, it's going to be restaurants. So let's go to the search just to try to find a list, and I'll just type in USA. So we'll look for Michelin Guide reviewed restaurants in the USA, because it's a big country, they have lots of restaurants. And we'll see that we have 1,500 restaurants in the US that are on this list. And we also see that there's a nice element structure, right? There's these chunks of information that repeat across the page. That's a good sign for scraping. And if we go down, we'll also see that it does have the type of pagination that we want, going from page to page. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we can see what the next button would be to go to page 2. And we can also look at the link and see that page 2 has been added. So there's probably a structure. We could just go to page 10 and it would pop up. So this looks like a pretty good candidate to scrape. Now, what type of information could we get from this site? We could get the name of the restaurant. It looks like a city. The price, how many dollar signs, how expensive is the restaurant, and then what type of cuisine, Spanish, Japanese, Italian, etc. So there's that. There's also an image for each restaurant we could probably get. So it's pretty consistent across the different elements, except for one thing, and that is the number of stars that it has, or does it have some type of award? So every now and then a restaurant on the list will have a star. This little thing here is not a star, but still like a distinguished or a recommendation. So they put that on some, and that creates a problem because there's not a star here, or there's not a little face here, some type of thing that would be consistent across the different elements. So the short sort of advice here is consider that not scrapable, because we're going to try to build a recipe or a sort of formula in data miner that can grab every single element consistently. So we don't have spaces in our data that messes up the spreadsheet. We just want to have elements with the same information. Now, this star and those icons, there's actually a way to get them, but it's in the code. And so I'll show you that, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to look at this site. Now let's look at the actual details pages themselves. So the individual restaurants. We saw in the previous example with Coca-Cola how those details pages could be different. Some had videos, some didn't. Some had lots of paragraphs, some didn't. And that wasn't good for our scraper to try to grab the same information because the information was different on different pages. So here we want to try to look for pages that have a consistent layout. And so we can just kind of check right off the bat. I mean, these images are just huge. So that's kind of skewing how we look at these. Let me see if I can zoom out. So you can see how this is pretty consistent. Whatever is the same across these two details pages, we can probably build a scraper to collect. So let's look at what that information is. We have the name of the restaurant, like we had on the list page. We have a more specific address. Last time it was just Los Angeles, now we have the specific street address, and then the price as well as the cuisine. Next, we have a description of what the Michelin Guide writes about the restaurant. And if we look at another example, we'll see that it's pretty much exactly the same, except Kenzo has a star, which also puts something up here. Now, it's not a problem necessarily if this star is here. We can sort of skip that with the scraper. But what is problematic is the Kenzo page has facilities and services. Oh, San Laurel has it as well. And Cento Pasta has it as well. So we could get the facilities and services, but I have seen examples of restaurants that don't have them. So these three just happen to, but not every restaurant has the facilities and services. So that might not be the best thing to try out in the beginning. And each restaurant has a number and their opening hours. So we'll look at that as well. Now, just looking at this site and thinking about trying to put this data into a spreadsheet, grabbing something like the number, I would have a column of numbers for each restaurant. Seems pretty easy. You have the restaurant name and then the number to the restaurant. Something like this table of days and opening hours, it's hard to see how a scraper is going to grab that and then put it into one row, right? Because it has to sort of smush it into one row to be with the one restaurant in the spreadsheet. That's going to be difficult to do. It's going to look really messy. It may not even make sense. So for this tutorial, I'm just going to skip the restaurant opening hours. Unless you had a specific reason to look at those, maybe you wanted to see what's the average of opening hours of restaurants, maybe it's useful. We're going to skip it for now. So in this example, we have the list page for Michelin Guide. Looks pretty good, except for some restaurants having stars. And then we also have the details pages. Now, what the plan is for this tutorial is to build a recipe that will pull the information out of the details page. Things like the restaurant, the number, the description, things like that. And then once we have that built for one details page, we can apply it to a bunch of other ones and start collecting and building a spreadsheet and a database. Now, what I also want to show you how to do is to automate that process where we'll go to the list page and we'll pull out the individual links that bring us to the details page. So for this Kenzo restaurant, we would want to get this link. Why? Because if I click on a restaurant, the link is in this piece of code. So what I want to do is extract the links for all of these restaurants across a bunch of different pages. So I would build a list of links, and then I could tell data miner for every link, apply the recipe of the details page. So for every restaurant in the link, grab that information, put it into a row. So that's what data miner calls a crawl scrape. And again, you have to sort of upgrade your plan to actually do it, but I can show you how to set it up and test it to make sure it's working. And then if you want to do this sort of automated big collection of information, you could do that. And that's basically the difference of we can scrape 500 pages a month. Is your data more than that? Here we have, for example, 1,500 restaurants. So we could only get 500 restaurants with the current plan. And maybe that's enough. It depends on sort of what your question or application is. But the point being, the idea of doing a larger automated scrape is to get a huge list of links, for example, pulling all of them from these restaurants, and then making the scraper use the recipe you made for the details page, the individual restaurant, over and over and over and over and over, and get things like the address, the description for all the 1,500 restaurants. So that's a very long way to explain kind of one of the things we're trying to do here is to get the lists and build our details page. So let's start with that. So let's just go to the first restaurant, this Ambrogio. I'm not going to attempt Italian pronunciation here, Aquirolo. And we'll start building the details page first. It doesn't matter whether we do the list or the details, but it's a good idea maybe to just test, will the details page scraper work before you go and think about using this huge list. Right. So our first step is to build a recipe for the details page. So we can go to make our own recipe. And just before we start, I'm going to open this. I want to keep that open. Let's go back to easily. So we have our details page selected, and then we go to scrape. Now, we don't need to try to find rows because it's only one row. It's this one individual restaurant. So if we only have one row, which is the restaurant, then we need to get pieces of information to put in as columns. And we do that by going to add a new column. And the first one I think we should start with is just the name of the restaurant. It's right there in the first thing on the page, and also a good thing to have is the first column in our spreadsheet. So I'll call this name. And it's probably going to be text, right? It's in letters. So I hover over it and I press C. And yes, data miner found that that was the thing I was looking for, the name. So hit confirm. Now let's go for the address. Add a new column. Let's move this up. And it's not recording. We'll go to address. And it got it. Perfect. And just to clarify, it has nothing to do with me typing an address that data miner is searching for. I could call this anything. It's just selecting it. And data miner is guessing the code correctly for what I want. Now, the third thing here is this line of information. There's the price or how expensive the restaurant is, and then the type of cuisine. And ideally, we want to have these in two separate columns, right? It'd be nice to have the price and the cuisine. Those are different to us as humans. For the computer, and the way that this code is written, the computer's not going to be able to actually break these apart. And I'll show you why in a second. But first, let's just try to grab it with Data Miner. So I'm just going to call this information. Normally, I would call it like price, but it's not going to work out. So just to show you, like the same way we would get the address, Data Miner is saying, great, found your item, it's just the price. But it's actually also getting the cuisine. I didn't know that until I actually checked the data and saw it like this. But from that little box, you couldn't see it. That it is giving me this block or element of information, but it's not separating price and cuisine. But it's working some way. Now, if we go to View Developer, Developer Tools, and just check the code here, I'm curious, why is it not breaking this into two different blocks? Sorry, this is on, I have to just activate this page to bring up the code. Okay. So I just want to narrow down to that piece of code and just kind of inspect what's going on. Could I make it more specific somehow with the selector? Okay, finally got to it. It can take a while. So what I see here is that there's this text, the price and the cuisine, and it's in this span tag. The important point is that this text is in between two tags, so the computer is just treating it as one unit. If the website was coded where there was the $signs in one tag and the cuisine in another tag, we could get them both as separate columns. Point being, it's just the way the website is coded. We're not going to be able to separate these with a scraper. The computer is just looking at this as one thing. We see it as two different things, but for a computer, it's just basically one word, can't separate them, and there's no scraper that's going to give us these different things. But they could be. It could have just been coded with a section for the price and a section for the cuisine, and then no problem for the scraper. So we can't change how someone wrote this website. We can only pull the information how they've written it. And that's important to know about web scraping, that we're just trying to pull what's in here, basically. And we can't change how that's written. So we have the information, it's just in one column. And then, next I will go for this text description. And so I'll just call this description. Easy column finder, looking for text, hover over it, hit C, boom, got it. So pretty straightforward, these 4 columns. Basically just point and click, press C, it works. Now, this is going to get a little bit more complicated because you would think, let's say we want to get the number. It just looks like text, right? Data miner doesn't find it. So our next step is what's going on. Let's see what is happening in the code. Again, just to inspect it, if nothing else. It doesn't hurt. There we go, finally. All right, now I can zoom back in to try to find this number. Getting closer. Okay, finally we got the table. It's all the way down. And this is the real world code. Okay, so in this chunk is where we see the number. And the first thing is that we see it as an attribute. It's in quotations, and it has something with an equal sign before it. The attribute is an href, and that is a link in an A tag. So I don't expect you to remember that, but it's the common way to hyperlink something. And so actually, this is not text, it's a link that asks you to open up Skype, or if you were on your phone and you tap this, it may bring up your actual phone app. So that's why data miner is not getting it. So we know it's an attribute. What we can do is change data miner from looking for text to, and this is tricky. There's no cost in trying all of them just to see if one of them works, but we would think it is an attribute because it's in an attribute form, the telephone number. There we go. No, it's pulling up all of these different attributes. For example, here's one called restaurant, data restaurant distinction, and here we see data restaurant distinction. So it looks about 5 attributes in here, and there's 5 here, so that's probably where it's coming from. But it's not giving us this attribute, which is confusing. And the reason is it's actually a hyperlink or a URL. So just as I showed you, it actually goes to a address to do something. It's activated. So what we actually need to tell data miner to do is look for a URL. And that's quite confusing, but the telephone number is not text, it's actually a link. And if we don't tell data miner that, it's not going to find it. So we have to go look at the code and kind of guess around what's happening. Okay, it's an attribute, let me try that, didn't work. Again, you could just click all 6 of these to see if any of them works before you go down to try to do something more advanced. And a lot of times that will solve the issue. So if we tell data miner to look for a link, it actually does find it as the telephone number. We can check the data, preview, it got the telephone number, great. Now, these opening hours, oh wait, I almost forgot the most important, most interesting thing here. When we, my program is bugging out here. Or we can actually see it here. Data restaurant distinction equals plate. It also popped up as one of the options we could select in those 5 in Data Miner just a few minutes ago. And that's where I saw it, just playing around with Data Miner. I wasn't reading the code so specifically, and I said, oh, data restaurant distinction. That sounds like it means perhaps that's where the star information is, the Michelin star information. So that turns out to be the case. If we look at this restaurant, it doesn't have a star. It doesn't have this, this little mark. Like if we look at Uka's page, I don't know why everything is so zoomed out, but this has 1 star. And after looking around for a little bit, scraping a couple different pages, like ones with the star, what I learned is that if it doesn't have a star, it's just called a plate in the code. And that's what we see here. So just as an idea, I thought, let me just capture this. I saw it was an option in Data Miner under attributes, under the telephone number. That's just how it was in the code. That will actually solve our problem of finding out which restaurants have the Michelin stars. It's hidden in an attribute that deals with the telephone number. We would never even come across that by not looking at the code. So it's a cool bonus. I didn't expect to find it there, but it happened when I was looking for the telephone number. So we can actually put the rating of the restaurant, even if that information is not displayed like this on all the sites. The information is in the code. And so the way that we get this, which is super random, but just happens to be the case on this website, is we select attributes. So look for attributes in the chunk of code that has the telephone number, and there we'll see the data restaurant distinction is indeed the rating. And then what we also saw in there was the cuisine. So, and in looking at the number, we basically got a lot of bonus information. See, cooking type, Italian. And that kind of solves my problem here, where I couldn't separate it from price. Now I actually do have a separate column for the cuisine. So let's look at what that looks like. I think that's all the information for now that would be interesting for this page. The opening hours, you can just kind of imagine taking this table and trying to put it into a row in a spreadsheet. It's not going to look very good. Technically, yes, it's possible to make scrapers that handle, these types of tables, or we could just go and scrape just that table. But it's not worth getting into here, and it's not really that interesting. The opening hours of the restaurant. I mean, could be interesting in some way, but I think we have enough scraping here, and it's good to move on. So I'm going to save this as Michelin details page. And what I can start to do is scrape. So let's let it rip and look at what it gives us. We've got name, address, information, description, number, rating, cuisine. So that's good. We've definitely got it for this restaurants page. Now let's see how it does on other details pages. So we want to open up a few just to test them out. What I'll do now is I'll do scrape and append. What that's going to do is it's going to scrape this page with the recipe and then put it as a row here. All right, so I've got Solare, and then I guess I can just do it in the same tab like this. So I have Nari, but then I would have to go back. Oops. So you see how each page I go to is being added. And it's kind of a back and forth. You don't have to keep going back. But you get the idea. The important point is that we can go through more restaurants, but let's see how the scraper did. Pretty good, right? We have the names of the restaurants, the addresses, the information, the description. Now the number we don't have for all of them. And we don't have rating and cuisine. So the number is probably not there for Tacos Oscar. Let's see. The number's not there. And that's really important. When you see blank pieces of your data, then go and check, are they even on the website? If they're not on the website, that's fine, right? I don't have a number because there's no number listed. It's not that my scraper is missing it. But it is also missing the rating and the cuisine because that was in the number, in the code, in the same chunk of code. So I have to live with that. I've lost, this is actually what's called a bib here. It should be there. It's not. I could go and edit the recipe and try to find somewhere else in the code that we see that same attribute with the rating, but I don't have it here, and so that's a signal to me that I'm not going to be able to get this information for every details page with this recipe, because some are missing numbers. But I do get everything else, which is good. Just close through some tabs here. So now we have a recipe that works for a good chunk of the data that we want. Now what I'm going to switch over to do is collect the links for every restaurant. So for example, this piece of information from every element on the list page. And the idea is to get the list for each restaurant and then take this recipe and apply it to each one, rather than doing the scrape and append, which is time consuming. Again, it's a great method if you're interested in getting very specific pieces of information, like filtering through this list of restaurants just to get ones that share something with their picture, for example. Then you can just go grab the restaurants that are good for your data set. But if you want to get the whole thing, then you'll need to do, you have to build lists of links and have the recipe go automatically to those different ones. So maybe a good time just to pause and switch over, because we're going to have to open up a new recipe. All right, so let's do that. We'll start on page 1, and we're going to build a list recipe for these elements. And as we'll see, it's a bit tricky. So this is not going to be the standard process that we've seen before. Just how the website was coded. So the first thing we need to do is we need to define these element chunks, basically by clicking 1 and 2 on the first one and the second one. Whoops. Just trying to click back onto the page. So it did get 1. See that green check? But it hasn't drawn the box yet. So I press 2, just following these instructions. And yes, we've got it. And now we want to get the information within each element as a column. And the first thing I'll try is name again. Let's see. We'll try text. It looks like text. But it doesn't, I can't really highlight anything else around here. So we can look at the code. We can try a couple different, can I just get the URL out of here? Yes, I can. And why? How does that sorcery work? If we look at the code, let's keep moving down. There we have the link. It runs across here, but it's in an A tag, which signals a link. It's in an href attribute, which is a link, a URL. So there it is. And data miner basically just matched what we were selecting with this. It basically guessed correctly. So we can actually go ahead and we can just call this URL. If we preview it, we've got the links. For each individual website, which is actually all we really wanted. Now, we should be able to get the name. Perhaps as an attribute. Here it is. Well, we have an attribute called aria label that says open and then the name of the restaurant. So that will get us the name of the restaurant, but it would also give us the word open in front of every restaurant. And for now, I can live with that. In Excel, I could just find and replace open and delete it later. But I know this is working. So this gives me the URL for each individual details page for the restaurant and then the name of the restaurant next to it. Simple little spreadsheet, but exactly what we want. And one last thing, easy to forget, is our pagination, and that's in the next step. In Data Miner, we want to tell it where does it go to look for the next page, because remember, we want the links on one page, and then automatically second page, automatically third page, all the way up to page 76 here. And we can test the Data Miner find it. Yes, now we're on page 2. So pretty cool. And we'll call this Michelin link harvester. And save it. And then let's just go straight to scraping it. In Data Miner. So we have the navigation built in to go to the next page. So let's scrape 10 pages, and I'll try to put 2 seconds, but it seems like it always... All right. For some reason, I cannot get the seconds lower than 6. But that gives us approximately now 50 seconds left to let this thing run. And we can just, you'll see it's delaying every 6 seconds. Here we have a 3-star restaurant. But anyways, you'll see what we're actually getting here is the links and the name with open, but we're building a large list of links. We're going to have, 100 or so at the end of this scrape. And so you can see how you have this 500-page limit per month. So it resets every month with Data Miner. So if you want to scrape 1,000 links, you would need 2 months to do it. But the process is quite simple. Get the links, find where you go next page, and let it rip, basically. So we have 120 rows of links, 140 for all these restaurants, and we can just kind of see that none are missing, which is exactly what we want. We don't want to have, again, with our telephone number example, that was missing because it wasn't on the web page. If you start having lots of gaps in your links, something is wrong with the list recipe. It's still scraping. Right. So it scraped 10 pages, 20 restaurants each. We have a file of 200 links. And I'll just save it here quickly because we want to save that because we're going to now basically combine the two scrapers. We're going to take the output of what we just got, which was the list of links. And then we've got the details recipe we've created. And now we're going to put them together in what is called a crawl scrape. And again, this is a premium feature. You need to upgrade your plan in order to do this, but it will let you test to see that what you have is working. So I'll just briefly show you this as what you could possibly do. So we have a CSV file of links. I'm just going to open it. It's what we just made. we've saved this as a .csv. And then what we can do is we can upload it. Oh, all right. There's one more step that we need to do. We need to go to Upload Files and upload our CSV. And then go to New Crawl, Imported CSV, and now we can select it. And then it asks us which column contains the URLs. I was just going to show you in the spreadsheet, but it's called URL. That's what we named it. And data miner will check. It says the URLs work. It lets us go to our recipe. Now, what this is asking is, what is the details page recipe you want to apply to those URLs? And I have called it Michelin details page. And then what I'm doing here, or what I'm being asked to do, is define how many of these links do I want data miner to scrape, or in its language, to crawl. So I would just call this Michelin crawl. And then it asks me, basically, how many rows do I want to scrape? I start at row 1 and then go down to at least 200. But I can't fill this in because it's part of the upgrade plan. And then yeah. Oh, it's running right now. So what it's doing is it's giving me, for these first 3 links, those first 3 URLs I had, it's going and applying the details page to them. So we see that page moving. That's data miner actually going through the URL to the details page, using the recipe to get the name, the address, etc., and putting it into a spreadsheet. And why would we do this? We would do this because we could set this for every single restaurant and then go have some coffee, go have dinner, whatever, come back maybe an hour later, and we'd have a spreadsheet of all the information that we could get from the restaurants for all 1,500 of them. So hopefully I can download this, yes, and show you what it looks like. So this is the test kind of 3 rows that data miner allows you to kind of trial. And it doesn't look super pretty, but it does have the name of the restaurant, the address, this price cuisine, and the description. The telephone number. If there's a telephone number, it also gives the rating. Does it have a star or no star? What they call plate, and then the cuisine. So imagine if we had the full crawl, we would have this information, for 1,500 rows, all the way down to wherever. That's basically web scraping. And so for now and from now, it's really about you going out and just playing around with data miner. You're going to get frustrated with it. It definitely takes a little bit to feel comfortable with. And even myself, who's used it quite a bit, I don't know that a link is going to be in a telephone number. that's something that's in the back end of the page. So spending some time and just really working through, there's no quicker way than sitting down in front of a website and just kind of going through the CSS selector and just looking at different, when things are lit up, what is that code looking like? Does it usually have links? What are the attributes names? Do those attributes have valuable information in them or not? Just spending some time at different websites and learning the little different functionalities of Data Miner. As you've seen, it's not a very complex tool, but sometimes you do have to fiddle around with different settings to try to get your piece of information. Looking at the code helps. Sometimes it just works beautifully. Sometimes, maybe in the end, you may have to give up on a piece of information. And so that concludes these set of tutorials. Don't forget about the resources with Data Miner on dataminer.io. They have some very, very basic, even more basic than books to scrape, to practice on, just in terms of getting familiar with Data Miner. Those are really helpful. And good luck out there working through different attributes and elements. It is a little bit, a lot in the beginning, but you'll see that web scraping is more than anything trial and error, playing around with different things, and trying to spot interesting information in the code that you can scrape. So good luck, and I hope you have fun with it.